Well, a lot of other stuff going on here on the C Spire text line. Darren in Jackson says, Kimmel says how sexist and misogynistic Trump is. Have you ever seen The Man Show with Jimmy Kimmel? Pot, meat, kettle, huh? Darren, crazy. Let's see here. If they thought the ratings were bad before, just wait. No way his ratings improve with all the affiliates that still won't be carrying him, says Robert and Brandon. Yeah, I agree. I mean, obviously, as Will pointed out, one of the biggest, if not their largest affiliate, ABC's largest affiliate, Sinclair, said, yeah, we're not going to air it. So right off the bat, you would think that would have a negative impact on the ratings because you can't even get the show in those markets. So that's a huge problem. Kimmel was intoxicated with glee upon hearing from a bad source that the assassin was MAGA and way too eager to spread it on the C Spire text line. Yeah, it's the jackpot for the left, man. I agree. They live for those scenarios. It's just like to fuel their big time lean into race in this country. Anytime there's an event, an incident involving an officer and a perpetrator, they always hope for, seem to be ready to celebrate the idea that it's a white male officer and a black person who received some sort of treatment by the officer that they've deemed to be police brutality or rooted in racism, stuff like that. They live for that stuff, man. It's incredible. They celebrate it, which is sick. All right, we got the professor now. All right, Professor, you there?
I'm here. I've been here. I just haven't been audible.
We think we got that figured out. So we wanted to have you on to talk about all these various terminations and cancellations going on since this assassination of Charlie Kirk. Many organizations are taking action. You've seen it, the private sector, the public sector, really across the board, not unique to any industry or any discipline. And the reason given by these organizations, by the employers, is that, well, you've said something that was inappropriate, that was just insensitive and harmful, and therefore you got to go. Help us understand the law on this particular issue.
Yeah, so I mean, with the Jimmy Kimmel stuff, I mean, the first thing to remember is, of course, he's not being employed by the government, and he's not directly being told by the government that it is illegal to say the things that he has said. So there are two aspects. Two interesting aspects. So first of all, ABC, they are entitled to look at his show, look at the numbers of people advertising. So I don't know if you watched the monologue in detail. The thing about his show, he really kind of treats anything that Trump is doing as just in itself worthy of laughing at. So it's almost like he's not making jokes. He just says, well, Trump did this, and everybody just is assumed like you're supposed to laugh at it. So it's a certain kind of group experience of comedy that ABC is perfectly within the right to say, like, yeah, this kind of edgy political in crowd wink and nod type stuff isn't really making people want to buy potato chips like we need to keep you on the air. And like you were saying, he had this kind of really sort of bonkers excitement about the idea that it was a right winger or a Trump fan who had killed Kirk, which is odd. I mean, just very odd. But then, okay, so ABC, they operate under a license from the FCC. So we've got these old precedents that say when the FCC makes decisions about who it gives the license to, it has a little more leeway.
Yeah.
Because the airwaves are scarce, they have a little more leeway to decide whether to do that relative to when they're doing just straight-up regulation. You said X, we're going to punish you. But those precedents actually, they're kind of old. The main precedent on the First Amendment question, this Red Lion case from 1969, there's been a lot of people questioning it in terms of modern technology. Is airspace as scarce in a way that justifies a more lenient approach to something that looks a little more like censorship? Independent of that, then there's the government employees, right? So Ole Miss had an employee who got sacked for saying positive, or well, I can't remember quite what it was. It was retweeting something that was something like dancing on Kirk's grave.
Yeah.
There actually was a 1987 case at the U.S. Supreme Court in a very similar posture. So this was somebody who had a non-public facing public job with the government, who, when President Reagan was shot, said, well, next time I hope they get him. And the people, I think it was in, I can't remember where exactly it was, but the people said, oh, this isn't the kind of person we want working for our police department, I think it was. And they sacked her, but then the Supreme Court said, well, this isn't sufficiently job related to be able to fire somebody just because you don't like their politics. And there's a lot of criticisms can be made for the way that the government has regulated government employee speech lately. But it is very interesting that firing people for expressing kind of really offensive thoughts after somebody gets shot is it's something that happened 50 years ago as well as last week.
So why do you need a reason, Professor? Because I know in my company, working with our labor attorneys, we did require contracts with all of our employees, but it was very clear up front when you entered into that agreement to work at the company that it was totally discretionary on both the part of the employer and the employee. You can come to work here, yes or no, and we can let you go for no or any reason or no reason whatsoever, and you can leave for any or no reason whatsoever. We don't need a reason. But all this, right?
So this is the kind of thinking that people, that a lot of kind of tough-minded business folks reaction they have to these cases, these Pickering cases. So there's a case called Pickering from 1968, Connick. This was involved Harry Connick Sr. in 1983. And since then, the Supreme Court has said, look, if you're a public employee, if you're talking, and it's actually been limited to stuff that's not in the scope of your employment. If you're just talking politics, government can't just fire you. They have to come up with a reason. And, so you might think, well, my goodness, somebody who says really offensive things about President Reagan getting shot or Kirk getting assassinated, they're pretty likely to have goofy conversations about other stuff too. Just like not likely. You can just kind of get a bad vibe about the office atmosphere when you got people like that. That's not good enough, according to the Supreme Court's interpretation of the First Amendment. And there's, I think a very strong scholarly argument that, well, the 14th Amendment doesn't cover the right to public employment at all. It doesn't cover voting. It doesn't cover any political rights. So if you went with the original meaning of the 14th Amendment, it would, the government really wouldn't be restricted if you're not talking about the civil rights of the citizenry as such. If you're just talking about public employees, you'd have a lot more space for the government. But that hasn't been the rule since at least 1968. And, that Pickering wasn't the first precedent where the Supreme Court has said things like this. So it's been a very murky balancing test for 50 years, really since '68, and it doesn't look like it's going anywhere anytime soon. The scholarly criticisms have been mounting, so it's possible they'll come in and give government a lot more room to kind of get impolite or outrageous people out of their workplace. But don't count on that anytime soon.
Okay, we got a break right now, but if you can hang on, I want you to come back because I want to make sure I understand that what I think you're saying, that there's a somewhat of a distinction between public sector employment and private sector employment. Is what I heard there.
That's right. That's right. We can talk about that in a minute.
Sounds good. We got Professor Christopher Green on the line. We're coming right back. Back with you in the Element Wealth studio, Professor Christopher Green from The Ohio State University, our guest. All right, so, Professor, before we went to break, apparently there is a distinction, right, between public sector employment, private sector employment, with respect to, I guess, the criteria, the gates that have to be jumped through in order to terminate employee.
That's right. That's right. So according to the Supreme Court, you can't just fire people from public employment based on their politics. For private employees, of course, you've got lots of statutes that say you can't fire people for certain reasons, and in some states, they actually include politics. So in some states, like I think California includes this, and some others, they say, the fact that somebody has politics different from you, even if you're just running a grocery store, you aren't allowed to have a Democrats only grocery store, but you're certainly not allowed to have a Democrats only department of government. At least to the extent that you're talking about stuff that isn't directly in your job portfolio. Of course, the governor's office can have Republicans only. That's sort of what it means to be a Republican if you're in public office. But when you're talking about government employees, there's long been this line saying if you're doing stuff, if there's no disruption to the provision of the services from those political views, so that speech that you're engaged in, they're not allowed to fire you.
Okay. So bottom line is, if you go out and say dumb things, essentially, as long as you're still able to perform your duties satisfactorily, you're protected in that regard.
Yeah, but, of course, to the extent your job involves talking to the public, right? So Ole Miss wants to have a to look like they're not filled with nutty folks. It's highly, it really causes, when somebody gets killed on a college campus during an event, and somebody in somebody's office says, "Hell yeah." Well, my goodness. I mean, Ole Miss they've got a history here, and people have, in fact, been shot on our campus for having the wrong views. And, I think it's not at all obvious that it doesn't have anything to do with your job. It's not perfectly obvious that it does. So, it's the kind of thing that's fodder for the lawsuits. And But, the governments generally are allowed to have policies to improve the efficiency of the provision of their services, and then sometimes that means taking account of people's speech. If ABC were a governmental thing, there's no question they could say, "Look, you're making people upset with this politics. I don't care if you do have a free speech right. You can go buy your own megaphone, buy your build yourself your own network, and you can do your thing if it's a private thing, and if you can get the air license." The FCC, the way that they've responded has not been, I think, perfect. Some of the stuff that the Attorney General has said about hate speech, Charlie Kirk, I think would be horrified at. I mean, there are lots of clips of him saying, like, no, that's not an exception. Because people, just the emotion that you attribute to people you disagree with is absolutely not a ground for restricting their speech. And so I really have been heartened at the number of people who have been going back to Charlie Kirk's own work on precisely this issue and saying, no, this is absolutely not the time to be saying that, an expression of untoward opinion about the man himself is a reason to restrict his speech. He would I think would be utterly appalled at that.
Of course, that's a different matter than when the DOJ gets in, when the Attorney General's saying, okay, if you engage in hate speech, we're coming after you there. That's kind of scary. I mean, that should be protected. I guess, Professor, help us understand, we got a little time left, where the line is drawn. If I make some sort of statement that's inciting or threatening in nature, that wouldn't be protected, correct?
Right. So true threats, there's a whole series. If you look at First Amendment free speech law, there's a whole series of things that you are allowed to restrict, and one of them is true threats. One of the big cases actually involved it was Medgar Evers' brother. He was leading a boycott, and he said some things that were pretty spicy, and got a judgment against him. The Supreme Court said, if you're not literally saying we're going to wring people's necks, metaphorically saying you're going to wring people's necks is protected speech. Yeah. There's a lot of questions about when has this metaphor become too serious?
Yeah,
and I mean, it's the same thing we've been discussing last week. This language about words being violence. I think it really is dangerous rhetoric because some people do take it seriously. And
Absolutely.
Think, I guess we can use self-defense like it's actual violence, and that is. I mean, it's a real problem with how we think about civil discourse today.
Appreciate it, Professor. Always good talking to you, sir. Take care. Thanks.
Take care. God bless you.
You bet.